Natsuki, why don't you go next?
The second shot hits Natsuki while she was distracted by Yuri. If I had to guess, she's probably in the same boat as me.
Well, a story's gotta have some humor, right? Some good jokes or just character interactions. What about plot elements?
It's obvious from her expression that Natsuki is winging the entire speech, and I can visibly see her cringe when Monika tries to pry further.
Well, sure, a good plot is nice, but it's not like stories need a super consistent or deep one to make them good. Stories without them are perfectly valid. That's a very unique perspective, Natsuki. I wasn't expecting one of us to take a stance like that. I believe you're right, though. Sometimes it's nice to read something without a terrible amount of thinking involved.
Oh, come on, you aren't even trying to hide it.
Exactly! Overly dark or deep stories like the stuff they make us read in class tick me off.
Sayori, still comforting the fallen Yuri, inquires further. You need the eye on the other side of that arc.
Really? I usually just find them too hard to understand. They're all too stuffy, you know? Like most seem to be written like the writer's just stroking his own dictionary. They always have overly complicated language and long, drawn-out details to describe the most mundane things. It's like, get on with it already. And then the teachers go on about how it's actually all a smaller metaphor and a bigger metaphor or something. That's definitely an exaggeration, but I think there's a certain charm to writing like that. It can make stories feel poetic and beautiful. Maybe to you, it's just kind of cocky. It makes them a pain to read. Not everything's gotta be written like it's from the 1700s. Making things simpler works far better most of the time.
I was wrong. Natsuki's was just as thought out as Yuri's. I'm going to be the odd man out if I don't make up something. Sensing Natsuki's speech is over, Monika moves on to select her next target. Her eyes seem to burn holes into my body, and I begin sweating as I anticipate the end.
How about you follow up, Sayori?
Her eyes dart away from me at the last second, and she chooses Sayori. Don't toy with me, you wench.
Okay.
Sayori doesn't seem to realize she's just been executed, and happily begins her speech. I feel better with her going before me. I'm sure her stance is probably as shallow as mine, though I do feel a bit bad that she'll embarrass herself.
Well, I like really happy stories, but there are some good sad ones too.
Sayori immediately struggles to fully explain herself, looking as if her entire brain is on full power just to continue her single sentence.
Stories with both are the best though, where that mix of happy and sad come together and make something,
Yuri chimes in with a whisper.
Bittersweet. Yeah, that's the word. Bittersweet stories. Like good romance stories, I really like those. I have a big pile of them back at home, though I often forget where I am in them, and just end up restarting them constantly.
Damn it, she has a valid answer too. If there was anyone here I was sure didn't read, it was Sayori, but it turns out I can't even rely on those closest to me.
Somehow that sounds just like you. Do you have any personal favorites?
Sayori takes a moment to think, furrowing her brow as she tries to pull a distant memory.
Oh, The Great Gatsby. We read that for English back in middle school and I really liked it, even if it was kind of hard for me to follow.
Hey, wait a second. You failed the test over that.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did. I remember you begging me to buy you ice cream to make you feel better after you got a...
Shut up! Even if I did, I can still have enjoyed the book, right, Monika?
Sayori looked over to Monika for confirmation, who nods nervously in agreement.
Well, it's not like a test score is able to gauge enjoyment, I suppose.
That's fair.
Why don't you continue by sharing what you're into, assistant? Statement, not a question. I'm quite interested in learning more about you.
That's... Monika's final bullet has shot me while I had my back turned. As the club's attention is drawn towards me, an increasing amount of anxiety clouds my thoughts, and I quickly try to think of something to say. However, the only things coming to mind are rehashes of the girls' opinions. Forcing my mouth apart, I spew out the only appropriate response I can think of. I can't read. Monika immediately expresses confusion at my answer. Yuri and Natsuki seem to be taking a double take, and Sayori...
1, 2...
isn't even paying attention.
Assistant, you don't have to be embarrassed to share with us all. I'm sure that none of us here will judge your taste.
Monika doesn't even humor my half-assed facade. I get that, but I'm not really sure what to say. Having nowhere left to run, I decided to just give the truth. It's not like I really have a favorite kind of genre or anything, I just sort of read whatever I think is good. Monica is clearly disappointed by my response, and embarrassment spreads across my face.
What about those books on your shelf? Books? Yeah, he has some books or something. Yeah, he has one with girls with swords and big books.
Hastily, I rush behind Sayori and pull on her hair, preventing her from ruining my reputation even further.
Ew! What was that for?
Huh? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, you do. You just pulled my hair.
Are you sure that wasn't just in your imagination? You do tend to daydream.
That's good. Nothing to... Wait, can daydreams do stuff like that?
What? You believe that? Anyways, Monica, you've been asking all of us, but what about you, huh? What do you like to read? Taking the spotlight off of me, I throw Monica's own question back at her. She seems to have been waiting for someone to ask as she swiftly produces an ecstatic smile.
Oh, well, I like to read a bit of everything, actually. I'm always looking for different styles of storytelling to explore, so I've ended up dabbling in every genre. Horror, romance, mysteries, satires, tragedies, even fables, a few epics.
That sounds much more intense than dabbling. Is she bragging?
Whenever we'd end up reading something in class, I'd always make a note to read some other pieces from the same author. That's how I ended up F. Scott's The Beautiful and Damned, George Orwell's Animal Farm, Jean Racine's Andromaque, Homer's Odyssey, and the Iliad.
I'm sure I butchered at least a few of those.
I also had a small stint with Twilight back in middle school, but I'd rather forget those books.
You're totally just bragging. Yuri, seeming impressed, speaks full sentences for the first time since her speech.
Horror? Then you must be familiar with Matterson's I Am Legend. Yeah, I read that not too recently after a friend introduced me to the original Night of the Living Dead film. I haven't had the time myself to begin reading it, but I have heard it influenced a lot of writers in creating the modern zombie horror genre. Well, Matterson treats the monsters like vampires, so there aren't a lot of specific plot parallels, but there are plenty narrative elements in it that you can recognize from modern zombie stories.
Lost words.
I'd definitely recommend giving it a read, even if it's just for the piece of history it holds. I'll definitely give a read once I can.
Natsuki stands off to the side with both me and the still distressed Sayori, looking at Monica and Yuri like they're an unknown species.
Book nerds!
Tell me about it. Natsuki lets out a slight snicker and looks up at me with an approving smile. It looks like I'm making a good enough impression on her. As the conversation between our resident bibliophiles continues, I remember me and Natsuki's conversation from earlier. So, I asked you about manga earlier.
Yeah, you did. Is there something you want? Or are you just picking a fight?
Natsuki's eyes squint into a defensive glare. She reminds me vaguely of an animal protecting its territory. I was just wondering what kind of things you read, actually. Natsuki's eyes press into an even sharper stare, seemingly cutting into my very soul with her gaze alone. She looks me up and down, before relenting, slightly and motioning over to her bag. Shuffling through some papers and journals, she produces a book from her bag, seeming to take great care not to bend or crease the pages or cover. Parfait Girls. I keep thinking this is Natsuki talking because the red is really close to the pink. The title immediately signals my brain, digging up a memory I had all but forgotten about. Mental images of meaningless mulling and asinine character dialogue fill my thoughts, and an overwhelming sense of nostalgia hits me like a truck. For once, overwhelming actually can be one word. Oh, this series. Natsuki's face lights up instantly.
You know it?
Yeah, I read like the first few volumes of this back in middle school. More like freshman year, but she doesn't need to know that. I got distracted by other manga, though, and never actually got around to reading anything past volume 2.
I wasn't expecting to ever meet someone else who wasn't a Parfait Girls.
I can see a small smile creep onto her face before she turns back to me.
Isn't Yui kind of like...
An idiot?
Yeah, she's always doing the weirdest stuff, like how she followed around a turtle for an entire chapter.
Or how she made a fire while boiling water. But yeah, she's pretty brain dead. At least the turtle chapter was pretty good besides that weird B plot.
Right? That gardening story is really funny. They even reference it later on, like how Mayuri gets all her cooking ingredients from the garden.
Oh, I totally forgot she cooks. That's a cool detail. Most slice-of-life stuff like the Parfait Girls just keeps their stories episodic and throw continuity away.
Yeah, it's like a reward for being an avid reader. You get all the in-jokes and small details. That's especially true in the later volumes, with years and years of stories piling on top of each other.
Whoa, don't spoil me.
Oh, shut up!
I'm quite surprised I man-gauged to open Natsuki up so much in a short amount of time. The two of us continue talking, which eventually catches the attention of Monika, who seems to remember her job of running the club. She wraps up her conversation with Yuri and gathers our attention.
Okay, guys. Now that we've gotten ourselves a little more familiar with each other, I'd like to discuss what today's main club activity will be.
Taking a deep breath, Monika walks back over to the podium. She looks over the members, who have since found themselves in a semicircle focused around Monika.
Each of us have shared today the kinds of stories we love to read. So I believe that we should continue by expanding our palettes and taking a dive into a genre we aren't too familiar with. In the back of the closet are a collection of books that I have gathered from the school's library and various teachers. I'd like each of us to choose something outside of our usual interests and read it, to discover a new experience we wouldn't normally. In fact...
Turning towards the board, she directs our attention to the list of genres as she had previously written down.
I've organized this list where each genre is listed across from its closest opposite. Of course, some genres are a little too specific or broad to make direct choices, but I tried my best to ensure you'd get a new experience. It would be ensure with an E. Very diligent work.
Monika beams with pride, presenting to us her trademark smile. The members begin to look over the chart, finding out which genre they've been assigned. It isn't long before a fuss is raised.
What? I have to read a horror book?
Monika doesn't seem surprised. My guess is she expected Sayori to be resistant to the idea.
Well, it's not like I'm going to force you, but I think it'd be good to try out something different. Besides, it's not as if they're all dark and bleak. There's plenty of variety in the genre. When you say it like that, I can't refuse. Fine, Yuri! Yes?
Yuri jumps at Sayori's exclamation.
Can you help me pick out a horror book? I don't believe I'd be much of any help. Our tastes are very different, but if you really want me to... Yay! Thanks, Yuri! Come on!
Sayori grabs a hold of Yuri's hand and drags her over to the books. It's very obvious Yuri isn't very comfortable with how familiar Sayori is acting, but she definitely doesn't seem completely against it either. I guess everyone's got a soft spot for someone like Sayori. It looks like we'll both get the same genre. Trying to pull Natsuki into another conversation, I throw some words into the wind.
Yeah, but there's no genre like slice of life on the board. I guess the closest we can get is saying they're comedy stories, but that means we're stuck with...
Looking at the board, I see that comedy is directly across from tragedies, which probably means we're going to be stuck with one of those so-called stuffy stories. The idea doesn't really mean much to me, but I can tell Natsuki is definitely not a big fan of the idea.
Let's just go find something!
She turns around on her heel and walks towards the back with a huff. Following suit, I find that Sayori has managed to make a mess of things with only a minute of headway. To her right, various books, which I assume have been rejected, are sprawled across the table. Luckily, none of them seem to have been bent by her carelessness. Natsuki begins to look through Sayori's rejects, making sure to stack them once she has also discarded them.
Hey, is this a horror book, Yuri? It's got a dark cover and the text is kind of scary looking. Well, The Book Thief isn't really a happy story per se, but I wouldn't consider it a horror one either. It's more bleak historical fiction. Aw, I was sure this one would be it.
Having lost another round of guessing, she adds the book to the pile of rejects. You know, you could be considerate and...
Oh!
Pulling out another book, she pushes it over to Yuri for approval. Yuri looks at the book only for a second before her expression drops and her face lights up into a furious crimson. She attempts to say something, but she only is able to get so far before her embarrassment creates a roadblock. That's...
Are you alright, Yuri?
Sayori doesn't seem to get what's going on either, which makes me curious to know what book she has. Hey, let me see that.
Huh? Sure, here you go.
Grabbing the book from her, I soon realize the source of Yuri's flustered state and begin to snicker slightly. Natsuki, looking over my shoulder, sees the book in my hands and joins in on the laughter. The lack of explanation from any one of us makes Sayori even more confused, and she begins to nervously laugh along with us, as if she suddenly realized the joke. Her ridiculous look of confusion causes me to laugh even harder, and I soon find it hard to breathe.
What's going on over here?
Monica joins up with us all, having now erased all the contents of the board. She shows just as much confusion as Sayori, looking at each of us like patients in a mental ward before I manage to calm myself down long enough to explain. I didn't take you for someone of such bold taste, Monica.
What are you?
Looking into my hands, she soon realizes what everyone else has. In my hands I hold a copy of an extremely popular erotic novel, which Sayori had mistaken for a horror book. The book is widely known for its explicit imagery and detail, with some newer prints of the books even including illustrations courtesy of a popular H artist.
Oh, wow.
Monica comes to fully understand the scene in front of her, and begins to laugh in a similar manner as Sayori.
I don't remember putting something like that in there. I guess one of the teachers must have tossed it in as an extra.
What teacher is reading softcore in this school?
I'll just make a note to return this one.
Monica hesitantly grabs the book from my hand, holding it somewhat awkwardly before she sets it into the front pocket of her bag. And so ends the tale of Sayori and the porn novel.
You guys are 12.
Each of us choose our books, and the previous scene is all but over. Sayori began to ask each of us about the contents of the book, but Yuri remained too embarrassed to clarify, while Natsuki and I only threw cryptic remarks when she asked. She quickly gave up and made her way to a seat to begin reading the book Yuri picked out for her. Yuri did the same, and Natsuki and I found seats next to each other.
Sayori's probably the most innocent person I've ever met. How does someone like that even make it to high school?
Lots of hard work. I can't tell you how many times I've had to direct her away from the adult forums on SNU.
SNU? You use that site too?
Yeah, mostly for manga updates, though. Lots of translation groups like to use the site as a news feed. I use it for other things, though, like a few manga communities.
I only really use it to keep up with the one community that I have some friends in. The community itself is garbage, though. I always end up in arguments with someone in the comments.
Anonymity lets people be assholes. In a brief instance of silence between the two of us, Natsuki's phone goes off and she looks down to check the cause.
Speak of the devil, I just got pinged.
Try not to die.
No promises.
So far, I'd say my plan to get closer to Natsuki has been going remarkably well. I'm honestly pretty surprised at how well I have been able to keep up with the conversation. Don't worry, Sayori. I shall not waste your gift to me. The sound of my own phone's buzz brings me down from my high, and back into the same world that Natsuki's fighting through. A commenter is trying to drag me into an argument they're having with a moderator. Natsuki is still occupied with her own battle, so I decide to join in. Let's see. Gallo Boob, 1 minute ago.
Yo, S. Orange and Grapes, I need your help.
Miner here still doesn't believe that the Sparrow fellow was the one harassing me. Can you vouch for me? S in a minor just now. You can't just claim someone is fucking with you and think we'll believe you. You have no show, no proof. Yeah, that's a Reddit conversation, all right. Seriously? Again with this shit? Let's see. Oh, so we're oranges and grapes. I should have read that earlier. If this many people have been complaining about him for well over a month, don't you think that's substantial proof to at least look into him? Minor? I know he's your friend, but you need to seriously lay off with your bias. Sparrow has been a trusted MBR of the forum for years. Stop acting like we're ignoring you. You know damn well why we don't take word seriously. This dude. If I die young, it'll be from the stress headaches Miner gives me. Ever since I joined this forum, we've been at complete odds at each other, even more so once they got promoted to mod. I can appreciate their ideals of justice and fairness, but it's nearly impossible to get them to back down, even when they've been proven wrong. Out of my peripheral vision, I can see Natsuki's expression growing in frustration, and I begin to wonder if she has her own internet rival like me. The club's meeting slowly draws to a close, and the conversation between me and Miner boils into an even fiercer and fiercer argument. With the original topic of the discussion having long been thrown away, we resort to petty name-calling in our DMs.
This freaking...
To my left, Natsuki's own battle seems to have turned out sour. She has begun to utter various curses under her breath, and her face has become flushed with anger. Her rage seems to reach a boiling point, and right before the club's hours come to an end, she gently places her phone onto the desk.